Officers and deputies, ever put an unsuspecting schmuck in his place while off duty? I'm a police officer in one of the smaller cities surrounding Jackson, Mississippi. And while on my way home tonight, I decided to hit the drive-thru at McDonald's. In this perfectly drawn diagram, we see how the situation was set up. As luck would have it, the placement of the two vehicles on the Google Maps image is perfect as there were already two vehicles in line before the schmuck does his thing. So me and another car enter the drive-thru using the proper route when the schmuck here decides he's going to try to cut in on us. The car in front of me attempts to pull forward and not let this lazy schmuck into the line, so the schmuck starts yelling out the window, "Move that thing, I'll harm you," etc., etc. Now I'm watching this, thinking this guy's an absolute lunatic. I can't believe it. The car pulls forward and successfully blocks him out of the line. At that point, homeboy exits his truck and grabs his tire iron from the back and starts going to town on this guy's front end. There's plastic and stuff flying everywhere. When I saw the tire iron, I hopped out of my car, but not in time to stop the damage. I'm in civvies, but I have my badge on a chain and my leg holster on. Didn't have my taser strapped on, so I drew my weapon on him and yelled the standard orders at him. The look on this fella's face almost looked like he'd seen a ghost. He nearly froze mid-swing. We can't believe he just did that thing in front of a cop. Yada yada yada, backup, report, arrest. I gave him destruction of property, obstructing traffic, and disorderly conduct. My town's pretty quiet, so it's not too often I make an arrest, but this one was the sweetest one I've had in a long time. Most of them are just DUI or somebody being a schmuck at a Waffle House, that kind of small town stuff. Yep, I guess that guy learned the hard way that in a small town, everyone's a potential cop or a witness. Story 2. I went on a field trip with my children to the pumpkin farm a few years back, which included my 2-year-old daughter. It was all mommies and one other guy beside me. I gravitated towards him and we started chatting. We all got on the local public bus to go to the pumpkin farm. The driver of the bus was insane. He drove about 20 miles per hour over the speed limit, ran 2 red lights, and ended up slamming on the brakes to avoid an accident on the second red light, launching my daughter into the back of the seat in front of her. She was all right, but cried hysterically. When we stopped, I had one of the mommies get off with my kids and went up to the driver and started yelling at him. I was ready to fight. I was so mad. I suddenly hear a calm voice from behind me say, "I'll handle this," and turned around to the other dad holding a badge. He then asked the driver for his driver's license. Turns out that the other dad was a highway patrolman. The driver was terminated. Story 3. So, I'm not a Leo, but I think I've got a good story for you. A few months back, I was leaving drill, Army National Guard, and was still in uniform with one of my buddies, a fellow NCO whom we'll call Russ. Now, normally, I don't make any stops on the way home because I don't like being out in public with my uniform on, but today was an exception. Going off of little sleep and in need of an energy drink or two and a pack of smokes to get where I needed to go, I stopped at a gas station. So my buddy and I go in and commence browsing their fine selection of drinks and discussing the various merits of each option. A few minutes later, this white trash wannabe gangster, we'll call him Mr. A-hole, enters a store and goes about doing what he apparently does best. He grabs a case of drinks, a lighter, and some chips before blatantly trying to cut in front of 4 or 5 other people. No one protests for some reason, but the clerk does ask him to go to the back of the line. He immediately becomes belligerent and starts yelling and threatening people. The clerk asks him to calm down and says she will call the police unless he leaves. He just gets angry and says, "You ain't gonna call anyone." He's already drawn my friend and I's attention, and without a word, we set our stuff down and approach him. Being the bigger and stronger one, I approach him from behind while Russ goes around to flank him. And this is how our interaction went down. Myself: "Hey buddy, why don't you just calm down and do what the lady says? You're making this situation a little difficult." A-hole: "Why don't you mind your own business there, soldier boy?" he says once he turns around. Myself: "I'd like to, sir, but you're threatening people here and I'm not going to stand for it." A-hole smirks, sets his drinks and stuff down, and tries to click his knuckles. Like, seriously, who does this? "I'ma harm your stinky head. No one tells me what to do." Russ: "I wouldn't advise that, sir. Fox and I are more than capable of defending ourselves and detaining you until the police show up." At this point, the clerk was calling the police and giving them our location. He yells and swings at Russ. Thankfully, Russ is a quick guy and stepped back just in time to avoid the blow. A-hole yells as I grab his free arm and pin it to his back as I put him on the ground. He starts screaming, making threats, and then starts crying about how he can't go back to jail and that he has warrants. Myself and Russ, we begin laughing. I know it's kind of a schmuck move, but the way he went from thuggin' to beggin' was way too funny. Plus, we're your typical disturbed combat veterans, so we'll laugh at almost anything anyway. A few minutes later, the police show up and start doing their thing. Mr. A-hole made some claims we attacked him for no reason, but the various witnesses and cameras pretty much proved him wrong. We hung around for a bit, made our statements, paid for our stuff, and then scooted on out of there. All in all, it was a pretty good time for us. Oh, and on a side note, after talking to the arresting officer, we found out he had warrants out for mistreatment, so that was cool. So guys, tell me in the comments, because I don't get why people with warrants typically seem to be the belligerent a-holes still. Like, if I had warrants out, I'd be as low-key as possible, right? Story 4. Before college, I moved around a lot due to my dad being an FBI agent. At this particular time, my family and I lived in Las Vegas, and let's just say my dad was a very high-level exec at the office there. This is a man in his 50s who is far beyond his fieldwork days, but always insists on carrying his secondary. So one day he's just getting some gas at a gas station when he sees a very excited woman come out of the convenience store. She had apparently just hit the jackpot at the gas station slots. Yes, they are everywhere in Las Vegas. The woman enters the bathroom around the side of the building, and after a little while, my dad hears screaming and struggling. He rushes around to see what's happening and catches a man running out of the women's bathroom. My dad immediately draws his weapon from his ankle holster, yells, "Stop, FBI!" Gets the guy on the ground with his hands on his head, then cuffs and arrests him. The man was indeed robbing the woman of her winnings and got hauled off by the police. After my dad waited out some very intimidating community confrontation without any backup, you cops definitely know how this is. For those of you who don't get the same weight of this that I do, this type of situation is incredibly uncommon for FBI agents, especially for senior execs. Anyway, what bad luck for the mugger to have an FBI agent arrest him immediately after committing the crime. If karma is real, it certainly was a witch to this guy. Serves him right. Story 5. I'm a police firearms officer in the UK, a bit like SWAT in America. Me and a colleague were driving through a reasonably large town that we work in around midday. We were in civvies and in an unmarked car. There had been loads of jewelry shop robberies recently, so we were going along checking everyone was okay. We pulled up and entered one of them to chat to some of the people we know. My colleague went out to the back to check some CCTV when a rather large gentleman enters the shop with a long coat on. He hands the assistant a note that read, "I have a weapon, don't anger me off, I will end you, give me all your jewels." The assistant shrieked, which put my matey boy off, and next thing he knew, he was down on the floor with, never before have I seen a grown man cry as much as he did. Story 6. Disclaimer, I'm not a cop, it just happened to be good timing. So I worked at a buffet in a bad neighborhood, and occasionally they would get people who would dine and dash. One particularly busy lunch hour, I was at the windows section and had just finished clearing up after a bus with my workmate. There are 3 sections in the buffet, which open and close every 3 to 4 hours as to be able to rotate people on and off shifts, and 2 servers per section, so about 6 servers, 4 busboys, hosts, bar staff, buffet staff, running food, and so on. There's a group of about 4 kids in the section farthest from the windows and front door where I am, near the bathrooms past the buffet. One of them hands a server in that section a debit card, and when she turns around to get to the machine, they try booking it for the door. Emphasis on try. Remember, it's a crowded restaurant and they got to go past 2 sections, the buffet and the front cash. Only 2 got to the door. Now you may think, okay, 2 out of 4 isn't bad, but there happened to be 2 cops with cars talking to a woman outside. I don't know what happened to her, but she had been talking to them for about an hour. We all chased the 2 thieves out the door, see the cops, and shout that they didn't pay. One cop took off on foot, the other hopped in the car and tore after them. A large black gentleman built like a football player had just come out of the grocery store next door. He dropped his groceries and took off after the little thieves as well. They came, dragging them back by the ear, and had to call their parents to pay for their meal. The parents were apologetic to us and paid for the meal. A couple of the fathers looked ready to tear their kids a new one. I honestly felt bad for the parents, but the method of capture, that was just epic. And if you're enjoying the video so far and liking some of these epic stories, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 7. Oh man, I'm not a cop, but I saw something awesome happen with an undercover. So some guy was driving like a schmuck next to me and he got behind the unmarked car. Apparently, he didn't appreciate the officer driving the speed limit, so he decided to cut him off and slam on the brakes. I was watching the whole thing and I knew it was going to be good. The look on the cop's face was impressive. He looked furious and determined, and I don't know how he kept his calm. Right when he got cut off, it looked like he wanted Hulk to smash out of his car and jump on the roof of the other. I kept driving and caught a glimpse of the guy's face through my rearview mirror. Looked like a 10-year-old getting yelled at. Story 8. We get undercover police in our store all the time. We have to call them out a lot to deal with people trying to sell us stolen goods. I've seen people arrested for some stupid stuff. One guy was walked out by a cop as he started threatening one of the staff. The guy just gets out of the queue, grabs the guy, and walks him out of the store. I wish they would have called the police on the guy yesterday. He refused to get in line, so I wouldn't serve him. I kept calling people over and he was swearing at us, mainly me, as I was trying to clear a queue that was looping around the store. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something fly at my head. I ducked as a DS game case crashed to the floor. This guy started screaming and I told his supervisor, who was like, "Did it hit you?" I said no, and he was okay, no big deal. It would have hit me if I hadn't seen it coming, and I was lucky I did because that would have hurt. He broke the case when it landed. The guy left the store, swearing his head off. I wish this kind of thing didn't happen so often. We have to just take being treated like trash, getting threatened all the time. Not cool. Story 9. Alright, so this is about my teacher's wife's cousin, Doug. Doug was the craziest guy you've ever seen in your life. Tattoos everywhere, bulky, and had that harsh look in his eye. Was constantly getting into and subsequently winning fights. He traveled around a bunch, and one time he stopped with a buddy of his at a bar they had never been to. Apparently, this bar was frequented by a really rough motorcycle gang. So Doug walks in the door with his buddy following him, and all 25 or so of the motorcycle gang that were sitting around a table stop talking and just glare at them. Doug just stared right back and sat down at the bar with his buddy. Pause. Doug never goes looking for trouble. It just sort of finds him wherever he goes. His severe look probably incites the surrounding alphas to challenge him, I don't know. In his hometown, he was so infamous for getting into fights that he ordered a drink at the local bar, and the bartender gave it to him but then pulled a weapon saying, "I know you're a troublemaker and I don't want you destroying my bar, so get out." Doug put down the drink, grabbed the weapon straight out of the bartender's hand and said, "Sure, but I'm gonna finish my drink first." Now back to the main story. A little while goes by and the motorcycle gang seems to have forgotten about Doug. They order a pitcher of drink and a barmaid brings it and sets it down in the middle of their table. For no reason, Doug walks over before any of them take so much as a sip, grabs the pitcher, and chugs the whole thing. He then slammed it down and rejoined his buddy at the bar. The entire motorcycle gang got up and left because they, quote, didn't want to be around somebody crazy enough to do that. Wow, okay, so Doug must have a trouble magnet tattoo somewhere on his body? Story 10. This is more funny than anything, but I thought I'd post it here. So back when I was in college, I worked with the campus police as a community service officer. We pretty much patrolled the dorms and told the kids to keep it down if they got too loud. Anyway, it was winter break and I was eating Christmas dinner with a coworker that consisted of soda, turkey sandwiches, and chips. The radios we have are the same as the police, so we heard pretty much everything they said. We were in the office and all of a sudden we heard over the radio, is that a missile or a plane? Understandably, we lose our mind and run outside to look up. Now, this thing definitely looked like a missile. We hear a second voice over the radio. I think that's a plane. I think, don't quote me on that though. It turned out to be a plane, but the way it was angled and the position it was over us made it extremely difficult to see the wings. It just struck us dumb that you have a possible missile flying over a college campus and the police were so casual about it. We laughed about it with the police like 10 minutes later. I later learned that there was an Air Force base like an hour away and that they would launch things all the time. Story 11. I witnessed this at the sheriff department in Reno, Nevada. A guy coming to post bail for his wife, pulling in the parking lot, courses out another vehicle driven by an older white-haired lady, called her a witch, and so forth, because she wasn't moving fast enough or something. Now, the old lady just happens to be the head nurse, beloved and cherished by all the deputies that work there. She was just coming in for work on the night shift. Next, Mr. Knucklehead decides to start yelling at the cashier who was taking the bail money. At this point, two deputies go to see what's the problem and decide to give him a breathalyzer. The result, 0.12, way over the 0.08. They ran his record and this was his third DUI, automatic jail time, and revoking of the driver's license. He literally crossed paths with his wife on the Sally Port as she was being released and he was being put away by the mandatory third DUI punishment. He also managed to anger the deputies by lying and saying he took the bus, so they just pulled off the security camera tape and brought in the nurse who positively ID'd him as the guy who yelled her out. Story 12. I went to college in Wilmington, North Carolina from 1998 to 2002. Directly across the street from one of the classroom buildings on the edge of campus was a Wachovia. During the summer of 2000, it was robbed 5 different times, roughly every 3 weeks. The robber would time the robbery so that he would get the cash and run into the UNCW building as classes were getting out. He'd pick up a book bag he had stashed and disappear into the crowd of students. It was genius, and it worked like a charm. Until the day he robbed the bank and the old man dressed in fishing gear behind him in line happened to be a retired Green Beret. The old guy walked up behind him and harmed him with his fishing tool. Not enough to end him, but enough to make it a certainty that the robber would have to go to the hospital to attend to his wound at some point. And that's how he was caught. Turns out the robber was my friend Turtle, who would drive down from Greensboro, about 3.5 hours west of Wilmington, to stay with some mutual friends every 3 weeks. And it turns out Turtle was coming into town on Thursday, robbing the bank on Friday, partying with us for the weekend, then retreating back to the UNCG with his 5K. Story 13. I'm friends with a guy whose father is an FBI SWAT in LA. He told me this story once. So he and his unit were dispatched to bring in a wanted criminal and assist with a substance ring bust. His unit gears up and loads into an unmarked white van, tinted windows, wearing full SWAT gear. They're parked a few blocks away from where the deal is going down, waiting to be called in. 2 men approach the vehicle and proceed to attempt to break in and steal it. My friend's father, who was in the passenger seat, throws his door open, knocking one of the guys down, gets out with his weapon and points it at the guy, now on the ground. FBI, you're under arrest. Story 14. My dad wasn't a cop, but this story is McDonald's related, and, well, I just like telling the story. So my dad, who was a rather unassuming guy with average build and stature, takes 10-year-old me through the drive-thru at McDonald's. I'm taking a few seconds too long to decide which milkshake I want, and the guy behind starts beeping his horn repeatedly and making hurry-up gestures from his car. My dad leans out of the car and asks the guy if there is a problem. Said meathead jumps out of his car in his stereotypical bodybuilder pants and starts marching towards the car, shouting and yelling. I'm terrified, so my dad turns to me and says, 1 minute, don't leave the car. He gets out, walks towards the approaching aggressive schmuck and just plants a clean headbutt. Then he grabs hold of him and proceeds to throw him through his open car window. Turns out he has a friend in the car who made a probably wise decision to stay seated. And that was the day I learned my dad really could roughen up your dad. And if you liked any of these stories and were entertained by at least one of them, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video, and thanks for hanging with me on this one.